Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We are with Impulse Storm, our level 15 brute. She has over 1,000,000 influence, mostly because of a trade down from, I think it was Tiger Strike, or maybe Quintessence Last, I don't know, one of our other characters. I think it was Tiger Strike. And we're actually on a story arc for rescuing Lou, the mechanic from the Clockworks. I did a 45-minute session yesterday, and I recorded it, and I was talking away and ranting about something that I will talk about again today, although I have the feeling that I won't do as good of a rant because, man, I was on a roll, and I don't even know what I said because even though I haven't changed anything at all about OBS, I was away for about a week, and this is the first time I played and recorded, and actually that's not true. It was the second time I played and recorded, and the first time everything worked fine, and then for some reason last night it just didn't record. It was recording desktop audio instead of microphone or something. I don't know what happened. So I'm going to have to try and figure out my rant and do it again. Um, so anyway, we're on the story arc, and we got to level 15 last time. And let me look here. So I added another slot here, and I think another slot there. So now one of the things that at some point I'm going to have to work on, but not yet, is the high pain tolerance is resistance, but also increases max hit points. And you can add healing, and so we could double that. So 42 max hit points, right? And then another 42, which doesn't ignore the buff. So this is flat, and this is added. So it's plus 84 hit points. So plus 42, and our base hit points is 509. So it's adding like 10% hit points, just under that, say 8%. It could be adding 16%. So at high levels, when you have like 1,000 hit points, this could be adding like 160 hit points from the buff, from the enhanced version, and then the unenhanceable would be another 80. So it'd be like 240 more hit points. So that's a lot. So I think we definitely want to enhance for that at some point. But I'm going to be more heavily sliding the attacks for now until we get more defensive powers in, which, well, we might do at level 16. We'll see. Let me see if I can try to remember the rant. I certainly know what I ranted about. So I've been doing physical therapy for my shoulder, and I've mentioned this before. Get out of there. I only got out of there because it was like causing a visual artifact. Anyway, I've been doing physical therapy on my shoulder, and I've been watching some Q&A live streams of Luke Hart, who runs the DM layer. And you can watch those on his channel, and I don't remember which one I was watching, the 27th or 28th one, I don't know. I started with number 40, and I've been working my way back. You can tell how much I've been doing with therapy. And the reason I watch those and not like his defined videos or videos by other people like Dungeon Craft is that those other videos are often shorter, like 5-10 minutes. And my therapy takes like a half an hour, and it's annoying to me to have to keep stopping my therapy and switching videos. I want to just go through it exercise by exercise and get it done. And it also helps if I keep doing it like back to back, right? So in other words, if I stop for 15 minutes to try to find another video to listen to, I'm going to have to like restart parts of the therapy because the stretching kind of undoes itself. I don't know how else to describe that. So anyway, I purposely look for longer videos, and Luke has some very long streams, and I was listening to one of them, and he's asked questions and then he answers them. And I often agree with most or all of his answer, but he gave an answer to one of them that I'm going to disagree with, respectfully, in all of its particulars. So let me set it up for you, and then I'll explain my disagreements. So he was asked the question, is it okay? He said, the person who posted said, I'm a GM of a homebrew world. I'm a DM of a homebrew world, so it's my own world. And in my world, certain of the races don't exist that are available for play. Is this a problem, or is it okay for me as a GM to exclude or ban races that don't fit in my world? And the answer, Luke's answer was, yes, it's okay to do. That you're allowed. It's something it's in a GM's purview for sure. But he said, I don't recommend that you do it. He said the reason I don't recommend it, that he doesn't recommend it, is that players often think it's really fun to try out new cool races, and you'll be sort of stepping on their fun if you exclude the race that they really want to play. He then said, now, of course, there's also the issue of sort of the integrity of your world. And he said, so what he would do, if somebody really, really wanted to play a race, say Dragonborn, that doesn't fit in his world, he'd say, well, you can play one, you'll be the only one, and you need to come up with a reason in your background why your character exists in this world. Make it their responsibility, and if they can come up with a good justification, they can play it. This allows them to have fun, but doesn't like completely alter the landscape of races and species in your world. So that was his answer. You can do it, but you shouldn't. And if you really don't want to add whole races to your world, you can just add them just for the one player. Like that's the only member of their race is the player character. So I'm going to disagree with basically all of it. And I'm going to start from the last thing, which is you could have them be the only one, and work my way back. So I think having the character be the only one is quite problematic. And the reason is that it essentially makes that character more special than player characters already are in D&D. Right? It makes it so that this character is now not just, super powerful by means of player character class combos, right, which are already ridiculously powerful. And Luke admits this. But they're now also a unique being, almost like an angelic or alien being that is completely different from every other being in the world. And I think that level of incredible uniqueness, that you're the only one, right, is not a good idea to give to a single player unless you're going to let every other player in the party have the same thing. So now let's explore the two possibilities, right? Possibility number one is that you only allow one player to do it, right? Only Jack, who wants to play the Dragonborn, gets to play a Dragonborn, and everybody else has to either play an elf or a dwarf or a human. That's not fair to the rest of the party, because now you're giving special treatment to Jack, right, the player. But if you don't do that, if you say, well, everyone can, then you run the risk of something like this. You have a world of all humans, elves, and dwarves, but the party of 4 is a Harangon, which is a rabbit person, an Owlin, which is an owl person, a Dragonborn, and a Tiefling. Right? A rabbit person, an owl person, a dragon person, and a demon person. In a world where everyone else is human, dwarf, and elf. How's that going to work? Right? This basically makes them seem like a bunch of space aliens in a Champions game where everybody's from another planet and none of them are human. Right? It makes the party, and the party's already special by means of being heroes. It makes the party, frankly, I'm going to say it, cartoonish. Right? It's like you're watching a cartoon now where, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where, the turtles are the only non-humans in the entire story, and they're like cartoon characters. Right? You've got like Bugs Bunny, Tweety Bird, Sylvester the Cat, as the characters, and you have these talking animals in a world of humans. And I just think that runs the risk of making the whole campaign seem kind of goofy. And also, it's going to make it really hard to play, because either the NPCs are all going to have to register the strangeness of the characters and talk about it, or they're going to have to ignore it, and then what's the point of even having it, right? If they're going to just act like everybody's human anyway. So I think I think whatever you do, I think it's absolutely a terrible idea to tell the players, well, we only have these races, but if you really want to play one that doesn't exist in my world, I'll still let you play it. You just are going to be the only one. Like, then where the heck did you come from? If there are no Dragonborn, how is there a Dragonborn in this world? Are you from another dimension now? Right? All the other players are from a town. All the other characters are from some town, and your character is from it's an extra dimensional being. I think this runs the risk of giving a lot of trouble for very, very, very little benefit. And so, no, I don't agree with the I'm special, more special than I already am by virtue of being a player character, and I'm going to be this weird race that nobody else is. The players should be picking from the races that exist in the world. Now, in terms of the idea that the players have more fun if they're playing these weirdo new races, playing a new weirdo race is fun and cool. Well, I said this before, the DM has to have fun too. And it may not be fun for the DM to run a Pokemon game with a bunch of animal creatures and weirdo races in his world. And the player's fun does not supersede or trump the GM's fun. And if for me as a GM, I want a world of human-esque things. And so I only want races that are very human-like elves, which are basically skinny, short humans with pointy ears, or dwarves, which are sort of short, stocky humans. Right? And I don't want stuff like rabbit people and owl people and bear people and stuff like that as the races in my world. Then I don't think that just because it's fun for the player, the GM needs to allow it. I think the players need to grow up. And they need to understand that a GM may be trying to achieve something by the creation of his world. And that as a player, you need to accept that and go with the constraints that are there and come up with something interesting and cool among those constraints. So, and I think this is the at the heart of all of this, and I mentioned this in a previous episode when talking about player agency too, without discussing this specific concept, but I think at the heart of much of this is a player resistance, a player dislike by, frankly, probably inexperienced players, or at least players who don't understand role-playing games, and maybe even games in general. There is this intense aversion to restrictions, to constraints, right? The ultimate message here is players don't like constraints, so remove the constraints so that they can have fun, right? In this case, the constraint is races, or the constraint might be classes, or the constraint might be background options. And players like more options, right, which means fewer constraints. Players seem to think that constraints make the game not be fun. But I think the opposite is true. I think that if you don't have constraints, you have a hodgepodge, you have chaos, you have a world that has no feel to it, no verisimilitude, no distinctiveness. Right? Being completely unconstrained does not make it possible to somehow make better stories. In fact, all of the best stories that we know of have severe constraints upon the characters. Look at Star Wars and the constraints placed upon the Jedi Knights and how they can't turn to the dark side and stuff. If you could just do whatever you want and kill whoever you want, there'd be no story in Star Wars. There are constraints. The characters can't just do whatever they want. And the fact that they can't is where the drama comes from. And I think a lot of players mistake freedom for the ability to have cool stories, when in fact cool stories come from drama, and drama comes from constraints. And so, I'm going to pause this for a second, and then I'll continue that thought when I come back. All right, so we're back, and let's hit the mission teleporter here. Um, yeah, I think that players mistakenly believe that anytime a constraint is imposed upon them, it's going to make the game less fun. Now, I mean, you might be the type of person who just thinks that constraints are unfun, and you just want to do wild and crazy and unrestricted things all the time and just have chaos. And if that's what you want, then that's, okay, that's your taste. But I think the vast majority of players, what they want out of a role-playing game is the narrative and the drama, right? And drama comes from constraints. Being completely free of all constraints does not cause drama. It, in fact, is antithetical to drama. And I think this is something that inexperienced players, and maybe even some experienced players who haven't thought about it that much, have misconceptions about. Constraints are a good thing, right? You see players who are like, oh, they don't like alignment because if they're lawful good, then they have to act lawful good, and that's impinging on their role play. It's restricting their role play. No, it's not restricting your role play. Being a lawful good character and having to play that way is not restricting your role play. It's giving you. It's like saying that would be like saying a creative writing teacher who gave you a writing prompt is restricting your creativity. No. What they're doing is helping direct your creativity into a particular direction to help you come up with a good story. It's not restricting your play or your storytelling. It's done properly. It's enhancing it. If you look at, for instance, I have all this gameplay, these gameplay videos about Starforged and Ironsworn, and if you look at that, there are rules to that game. It's purely narrative game, but there are rules, and there also are oracles, right, that help you come up with ideas. And so if I roll action and theme, right, and the oracle says, I don't know, that you've been betrayed by someone, right? It doesn't like harm my roleplay that I was betrayed. I have to then, okay, so I look at what the oracle says. Okay, well, I wasn't planning to be betrayed here, but who could be betraying me? Let me think. And I come up with something. And like I could ignore the oracle and say I don't want to be betrayed right here. But I try to follow the oracle each time. If you go back and watch, that's what you'll see. And why? Why do I follow what a random table told me to do? Because following that prompt, right, helps me come up with ideas for the narrative that I wouldn't have had before. And if you watch all those videos, what you will see is that I've come up with a whole series of really cool stories and adventures, none of which I would have thought to do if I hadn't been rolling on oracle tables and doing what the oracles say to come up with my prompt for the roleplay. So I get better creativity out of it. And really good experienced solo role players, if you look at like Trevor Duvall and stuff, they love, we might be in trouble here. They love random tables. They love getting more and more random tables. Trevor Duvall even says you have to watch yourself. Don't use too many because you can become overwhelmed, or because they'll start to disagree with each other and then you just can't come up with a story about these three disagreeing things that you just rolled. But he loves random tables. He uses them all the time in his Me, Myself, and Die show, and I use them. Every solo role player uses them. Like in the Ironsworn Discord, people are sharing other random tables and oracles besides the Ironsworn ones to add more random tables, more randomness, so that um, so that you so that there's more of information coming at you that you didn't generate to help you come up with your story, right? They recognize that adding these additional constraints, which are what the random tables are telling you you have to do, or what's happening to your character, adding those constraints increases your ability to cause drama and to have interesting stories occur. Right? So if I were to say, but I don't want to role play that I was betrayed, then okay, you don't have to do that. But there's a very high probability that the story would be better if I had just followed the oracle and forced myself to come up with a story that matched what this random table was telling me. By doing that, that's what stretches your creativity. By forcing yourself to do something you would not have ordinarily done. And this is going to be hard fighting this boss with no inspiration, so let me see if I can pull some inspirations from these guys. By forcing yourself to make up a story from a prompt that you didn't create, right? It was randomly rolled or somebody else gave you, that actually flexes your creativity. It takes you out of your comfort zone. It forces you to come up with descriptors and ideas and thoughts that you wouldn't normally come up with yourself, and that increases your creativity. So now if we go back to the races and you want to play, we've leveled up, so that'll make this easier. You want to play a rabbit person, and the GM says there are no rabbit people in my world. You're going to have to play a half elf. Okay, well, that is a prompt, right? That is the GM saying to you, here's my writing prompt, my creativity prompt for you is make a cool character with a human instead of having to be a rabbit person and frankly relying on the crutch that you look like Bugs Bunny to come up with something interesting. Come up with something interesting on your own using humans. Can you do that? I can do it. Right? And I suspect everyone listening to me can do it too if you really try. Right? And so what you have is, I think, folks who maybe aren't very creative or don't actually understand how creativity works. And they think that creativity is best when you're working with a tabula rasa, with a blank slate. Anybody who's a writer knows staring at the blank page is not an inspiration for creativity. And there actually there's like a story deck it's called. It's a deck of cards that's basically a bunch of random oracles, and you draw from the deck of cards to come up with a story or a plot, and then you start writing. It gives you a prompt, a randomly generated prompt. Why does that deck exist? And by the way, dozens of people on the Ironsworn Discord use it in addition to the Ironsworn oracles. Why does that exist? Isn't it constricting your creativity to draw cards and come up with there's a kidnapped victim and your character is the kidnapper? No, it's not constricting your creativity. It's enhancing it because it gives you ideas instead of coming up with sort of the blank slate. So I think people mistakenly believe that if everything is totally open to them, that's when they're at their most creative. And so if you don't restrict me in any way and you let me play this rabbit person, that's when I get to be my most creative. But that's actually not true. Creativity and freedom are not necessarily the same thing, and oftentimes your creativity is stimulated by having constraints. So if you play a character in a medieval society where your character is a serf and you're not allowed to address the nobles by their first name or something like this, that doesn't mean that you don't get to be creative with your character. It just means that there's a set of constraints placed on your character that you have to role play about, right? And at their heart, that's what role playing is. Think about how combat works, right? Combat is a set of constraints. You can only move a certain number of squares. You can only fire at a certain range. You have to roll above this number in order to hit. And if you fail to do that, if you roll below the number, you miss. And you are required by the rules to role play that you missed, right? These are constraints. And those constraints lead to fun, right? Because they prompt you to do different things in the story than maybe if you were just doing it of your own accord, you would just hit and kill the guy every time. But instead, they cast a spell on you and you failed your saving throw, and now your character is afraid and you have to run away and you have to role play something you weren't going to role play if you were left to your own druthers, right? And so that helps you be creative. And similarly, if the GM says, well, look, I know you like playing owl people and rabbit people, but there aren't any of those in my world, and the world is human-centric, and you can either play a human, a half-elf, or an elf. That's not stopping you from being creative. It's just giving you a guide. Okay, what's the relationship between elves and humans? Do they like each other? Are half-elves discriminated against? Are they seen as weird? Are they maybe seen as royalty? How does this work? Right? And so the GM describes, okay, well, in my world, elves are like very magical and humans aren't. So humans are actually looked down on, and the elves run most things, and half-elves are respected by humans but looked down upon by elves, right? And so now you know what to do, and now you know what to role play about. And so I didn't take him. Gotta say yes. And so now you can guide your role play by saying, okay, if I'm taking a human, then I'm the guy who's being looked down upon, right? And then you can decide your human is bitter and angry at the elves for the fact that they look down on him. And I got to level up and then we will stop. You might decide that you want to play an elf that doesn't look down on humans for some reason. Maybe because your character's in love with a human and you even have a child who's a half-elf, right? And so that gives you all kinds of cool role-playing possibilities. And so what's the problem here? Well, it's not the one I would have written if left to my own devices. Well, so what? That's not role-playing. Role-playing is cooperative. You're never left to your own devices. You always have to react to the other players, the other characters, and the NPCs in the world and what's going on. Left to your own devices, you would have told a very different story, but you're playing a role-playing game. By definition, you're never left to your own devices, and the whole purpose of playing the game is so that you're not left to your own devices, but rather so that you can collaborate with the other players to create an emergent story that comes out of the many interactions that you're having in play and aren't just coming out of your own brain, because if it's just coming out of your own brain with no constraints, that's called writing a novel. You want to do that? You don't come to the D&D table. You just open a Word file and write your novel. So I think a lot of the problem here, in terms of people wanting, be like getting upset that the GM has limited the race and stuff. A lot of that is role players in a misguided way saying, I don't want there to be constraints on my role play because that's limiting my ability to have fun. Open your mind, recognize that the primary way we have fun in a role-playing game is to be constrained by what the other people at the table, including the DM, are doing, and that it is actually enhancing your fun to do that, because you can play off the DM and he can play off you and the other players can play off of each other, and that's how you create your story. So instead of railing against the limitations the DM places on the world and saying they're not fun, accept these limitations and say, how can I have fun within these limitations? I don't think the GM should be changing their world to suit an individual player. I think the GM should present a world of high verisimilitude with lots of cool opportunities in it that are reasonable for that world, and the players should play in it. I'm not a huge fan of Eberron or the Forgotten Realms, but if one of if my DM said, we're going to play in Eberron, right, I would probably go whole hog on it and make up a Warforged, because that's the constraint we're working on. So let's go ahead and enjoy what we can of this world. It's not my personal favorite, but I'm going to go ahead and partake of it, and I probably would have a ball doing that, because if the world is well designed and the GM is doing a good job, then there will be a place for Warforged in that world, and there will be stuff in that world for me to roleplay about. Instead of me playing a Harangon that doesn't exist in that world, and there's not a place for me in that world, and there's really nothing for me to roleplay except I'm an oddball. That's boring, right? And even people who like playing oddballs, after a while, guarantee you that will get old. So my advice is don't rail against the constraints or resist them. Instead, recognize that they're there to help guide your roleplay. See them as roleplay creativity prompts, role-playing prompts, like the writing prompt of a story, there to get you a springboard into the storyline. And use those constraints for that springboard instead of resisting them. That is my advice. And now we are going to train up to the next level, and I got to figure out what we want to get. Rise to the challenge. When surrounded by foes, your ability to regenerate increases. And your resolve. So what does this actually do? It taunts, reduces their chance to hit, and increases my regeneration by 25%. Interesting. This is a toggle that makes me highly resistant. Smashing, lethal, and psionic. Now that's very good too. And then we do a cone of energy that sends them flying. So we got 4 and 3. Oh gosh, I want all of these. His power is always on. Let's do this one since it's not a toggle. It's a passive. And we're going to have to sell enhancements. I'll do that off screen. I hope you guys have enjoyed the rant. And once again, don't resist constraints. Embrace them. And you'll find that you have a better time role-playing. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.